Alrighty, everybody. My grand four. You guys are all to be commended.
We're gonna graduate no matter what.
You guys are totally fine. Yeah, no, you're fine.
Does our kid get an extra credit?
You do? Yeah, I'll make a note of it when I'm writing the recommendation letter in 2 years.
Thank you.
So we're going to get started. Hello to everybody online. Just a reminder, we do record this, so if you ask questions, it will be recorded online as well, forever on YouTube. If there's obviously people that should have been here and are not here, make sure that we're going to send out the recording over email probably tomorrow most likely, but if not by Friday. So just keep an eye out for that. But I'm pretty sure I know everybody here right now, but if people online, since we've changed caseloads, my name is Jeffrey. I'm one of the school counselors here along with Jennifer Django Cohen. We actually changed to a cohort model starting this year where we have some benefits of now getting to follow students through high school. So I'll be the even graduating classes, and then she'll be the odd graduating classes. And what's exciting about that is before that, I had only the upperclassmen, so I had basically a year to kind of get to know kids until they were seniors, and then pretty much would not stay in school if we, half the time forced them to, so they would be out of the building, and it was hard to kind of make those connections with kids. So I'm excited about this. I'm also excited because that means I'm also going to get to work with 9th and 10th graders again. 10th grade this year, and then next year will be 9th grade. But that creates a very interesting but revisited challenge for me, an opportunity where I get to work with students different than what I have in the last 5 or 6 years. So I'm really excited about that. Get to pull a couple old bags out of the tricks out of the bag, I guess I would say. Working with sophomores and definitely working with freshmen, a whole different ballgame than the junior and senior class. But if you need to contact me for any reason, my phone number and email on the screen there. But I do want to just kind of quickly highlight what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to go over some information that students tend to struggle with as sophomores. Sophomores is a unique, every year is unique, but sophomore is extra unique for a lot of different fun reasons, but also some reasons that are oftentimes challenging for adults and staff at school, as well as students. We'll talk about A through G. If you came to a 9th grade session last year, it will probably be a little bit of a review, but I always like to spend some time reviewing that information with people because high school every year that passes starts to get more and more real and more like the future is now looming in the windshield and getting closer and closer as we approach. We'll go over a little bit of like what a sophomore should be thinking about doing this year, talk a little about testing, and then some preparation work, and we'll have a little time at the end for any questions, okay? But just real quickly, this is me and my family, probably since, Joyce, you were probably before I had all these kids with some of yours, but I now have 3, Joel, Silas, and Micah. Joel's 7.5, Silas is 3.5 right now, and Micah's 1.5. So fairly busy at my house, and most of you know the drill, and kind of like it's in the rearview mirror for many of you, but it's exciting for me to watch them grow up and kind of see some of the stuff. So I'm also a parent, not at the high school level, but I do kind of share in the suffering sometimes, but also the joys of being a parent. But I also share this too because they are also full of germs, and if ever I have to cancel an appointment for some reason, just know it's most likely because of them. They bring lots of germs home from school. I also like to make sure that you know that we do have a website for school counseling, and over the last 10 or so years, I've spent a lot of time kind of trying to gather resources and information and putting it somewhere that is available 24/7 around the world, right? I'm only here certain hours of the day. I'm only here in this building many times, and so if you're not here, how do we get questions? If you're wondering what an answer is or doing some research at 10 o'clock at night, where can I get some of that information? I would encourage you to kind of check that out because there's a lot of really cool information on there. We try to keep it updated throughout the year, but I would definitely encourage you to do that. It's up at the top where the red arrow is under the programs menu, and then under school counseling is how you get there, and you can actually bookmark it because it's also where we make things like appointments happen. There's actually a cool little live chat option if you if you're like me or like a millennial and you like picking up the phone is something to be scared of and you want to live chat someone, which is how you solve problems nowadays, that's also available too. And so, it's great for quick questions and stuff. But I also want to just make sure to remind people too, when you're working with me as a school counselor, we're really part of a team, okay, as parents, students, school staff, and counseling. Our goal is to work together as that team to help support that student. I think most people and most students really bind to the analogy of sports, and using sports as the example of that kind of team analogy, in that the student is the player. The student is the person who has to come in, do the work, put in the time. They also get, ideally, the accolades at the end if they do things well. And us as the adults, we are the coach, we're the cheerleader, the trainer, the scout, whatever it might be. Okay, and so we take on those kind of tangential roles that bring us along with the student on that journey. Some of the things that sometimes get potentially in the way of that team working well is when one of the non-players steps in and tries to be the player, right? So that sometimes is tempting for us as adults, even as with my small children. Sometimes you just want to step in and this is just how you do it. You're going too slow, right? Like, let's just go. Or like, you're not doing it the way I would do it, right? That's a common one. Like, this is the way I would do it, and they sometimes have a very different way of going about solving problems or taking the dishes out of the dishwasher, whatever it might be. So just know that it's really important, and as you get older, it becomes more important to make sure that you kind of really start sticking into that role more. 10th graders are talking more about it, but are in this unique position where they are seeking autonomy, they're seeking independence. They don't quite have all the skills yet to necessarily follow through on some of that stuff. The last thing is also important too on this slide is that if you have questions, please ask. Some of you have gone through this year before, others of you, this might be your first time, and there's no dumb questions as we go through. Stuff changes every single year in education. Whether that's acronyms, the fastest form changes this year for seniors, like stuff changes, it's a fluid system, so if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. We talked about this counselor and parent relationship a little bit, but the students also have a role in this, and it's really to kind of start thinking about life after high school as an investment. Okay, we want to think about this investment of the last 12 years of our schooling, or 10 years now, or 11 if you went to kindergarten, but think of it as like this investment, this pooling of resources that now we're kind of moving into the phase of how do I do the adequate research to really step into the next phase and do a wise job of investing. Okay? And sometimes that's hard to think about because students, and sometimes even adults, really just want to kind of like, I should just know the answer, right? What should I do with my life? And that's not necessarily always easy. And it's a process, and it's not something that can be usually figured out in 2 hours on a Tuesday night at home when everyone powwows together and kind of like starts thinking about those things, okay? The last one on here is also really important, and that's creating relationships. It'll become more important this year and junior year especially, because many students will start needing resources and support from staff on campus, people in the community. And so whether that might be a recommendation letter, advice about how to apply to college, or a scholarship opportunity, those relationships really start to matter, not only for some of those kind of like side benefits, like this is important for me to start developing, but also for having that supported person on campus, right? So finding that person that you connect with on campus as a student is really important. If bridges have been burned, they can be rebuilt. If things have happened that, kids, I mean, really, that's kind of what up until 9th grade, they were kids, most of them. If they kind of acted like kids, that's okay. Like, we're adults, we kind of realize that it's developmentally sometimes appropriate for that to happen. I'm going to take just a few minutes and actually explain why some of that happens. So about 5 minutes in neurobiology. And so this is actually a pretty accurate representation of a teenage brain, especially in 10th grade. We have a lot of love interests, exploration about that, maybe some bad decisions about that potentially, and also some maybe heartbreak or sadness around that. There is information about, being really like focused on the ego or focused on being cool and socially present with their peers. That's a very big component of who a 10th grade, 15, 16-year-old student is in that time of development. And one of the things that we have as adults in the room, the benefit of, is having a fully developed brain. Believe it or not, students, their brains are not done, and our brains are technically not done cooking either, but they're going through a lot of pruning and reshaping of the neural pathways that basically let our brain work well. And they're missing a big piece, and we'll explain why that matters. But you'll also notice down here there's some awkwardness. There's this little itty bitty teeny tiny spot that says memory for chores and homework down there. They do remember that sometimes, but it's something that sometimes takes some prompting from us as the adults as well. This is a better example of what an actual human brain looks like. And then I always like to get for my kinesthetic learners out there, if you go like this, move your thumb in like this, make a 4, and then put your fingers over it like that. This is your brain, okay? And so where your fingers are at, that's that neocortex. That cortex is where all your higher level thinking lives, okay? Underneath there, if you go like this, your thumb area, that is that limbic system, and that's where all of your hormones, a lot of your, how you feel about things, and that emotional regulation, which sometimes we wish our students maybe were better at, that's where that comes from, okay? And then your arm down here is that reptilian, or your kind of like brainstem, where you have like the cerebellum and things like that. And that controls most of our kind of like instinctual things, the things that we don't have to think about, our breathing, our heart rate, kind of like when you have a reflex, that's where that comes from. So teenagers tend to have two main things going on. Number one is this limbic brain kind of starts to really go wonky for most students, in that it's releasing new hormones, it's not releasing some, it's changing kind of like its process of how to navigate the world. But really the biggest one is that neocortex, this top part. And going like this is really kind of a really good example, because we say this is flipping their lid, right? Because what that means is students' neocortex is not fully developed, meaning they can't use it fully until they're 24 years old. So sorry, you got another 8 to 10 years. But it gets better every single year, and we'll talk about that too. But especially in this front part, that's all related to decision making. How many of your kids like maybe made some bad decisions? It's not always like the strongest suit for teenagers, especially as sophomores. And of course, we have them do like really important things when they can't make decisions, like drive a 4,000-pound vehicle, start to work and like do these things that require like adult-like skills, but maybe don't have that adult-level responsibility yet. And this is I think it's an MRI scan of the brain as it develops from age 5 to age 20. And the purple stuff that you notice is actually activity going on. Okay, and so you'll notice things start up here with a lot of the communication and sensory motor areas. How do we move our hands? How do we communicate with our voice? How do we hear things appropriately? And it's not until we get to like 16 where you start to see some of this frontal lobe area develop. And that's an important thing just for us to know as adults. It's also important for students to know. We do share some of this information with them, because I always say it's not your fault. Like when you make bad decisions, you have some onus, but it's not totally their fault, right? And I think it's important for them to know that they're fighting an uphill battle as they go. Okay, so it's important just to know the context of what the developmental stage your kid is going through right now, and that it will continue throughout high school and even into life after high school. And then here's some of the common problems that we see partly because of that. Okay, so we start to see, when they turn 15, 16 years old, that's kind of a little bit of a rite of passage towards the world of it being an adult, where they get the ability to potentially drive, maybe to hold down a job or things like that. Maybe they can travel on their own, whatever it might be. They start getting old enough to make these decisions on their own, kind of like an adult might, but they lack that the good information to be able to do that, or be able to think 3 steps down the road. Okay, they can't think, what I'm doing right now, how does that affect me? 2 days from now. And that's where we see a lot of the risk-taking behavior come up, where, why were you driving 90 miles an hour? I don't know, it just sounded fun. Like, they can't imagine the consequences while they're in the midst of that, okay? That's also where we start seeing prioritization of socialization and like peer influences over things like academics. We also, on the good side of it, we actually call it here at school, I've been calling it for like 10 years, it's called the sophomore summer. Okay, and so what that means is there's a marked difference that we see at school when a student leaves 10th grade and returns in their 11th grade year. It's like the light switched on for many students. And so if you have a struggling student or a student that's hard or difficult sometimes, there is still hope that maturation process, and I think part of it is because they notice the light at that end of the tunnel start approaching and be like, oh man, I better get my poop in a group and start moving in the right direction. And then the last thing that sometimes happens is this still is a year of students sometimes being reliant on family quite a bit. They're still moving out of that phase where kind of like middle school, parents did a lot of stuff for kids. And this transition from being responsible for nothing to being more essentially responsible for everything is a tough transition too, and they can't quite grasp how to actually navigate what that looks like. Okay, so the good thing is how to get out of pitfalls is that it's not too late. There's a lot of opportunities. If a student had a rough 9th grade year or a rough start to the 10th grade year, or even like if it continues, there are a lot of opportunities. I think of it like a freeway. There's a lot of on-ramps and off-ramps to different things. And so academically, if a student struggled academically and like maybe they got a D or an F in a class, now is the time to come and try to start fixing some of those things throughout the course of this year to try to right that ship before it becomes more of a, we'll call it a crisis, but more of a concerning situation down the road when they get to junior and senior year. Like I said, it's an investment. The time that we put in now, and this is again, 3 steps down the road, their brain does not compute. They don't know that meaning investment because like it's kind of like pseudo-amnesia. They're kind of like living in the moment. So this idea of investment is really something we have to kind of harp on. So slamming the door of success is something we want to kind of, ooh, look at that, funny. Don't slam the door. We want to keep every door open that we can here at the school. Okay, what that means is we do have a strong college-going culture here at Nortel High School, and what that really means is we want every student to have the opportunity and know about it should they decide to pursue that path. That by and far means does not mean that every single student should or could or is going to go to college, and that's okay. Okay, and I think sometimes that's misconstrued in some ways in our own speaking, in some of our literature, or ways that we approach things. But that's not the goal, is that every student goes to college. The goal is that every student knows and has a plan for what they want to pursue after high school. We do think college is a good plan for many students, and we'll talk about a few reasons why, but that's just an important thing is 10th grade is pretty early to start shutting doors for things, and so we want to kind of make sure we're doing the work to keep things open. One of the ways that we do that is making sure students are continuing to work towards their A through G requirements, which are the 4-year kind of minimum expectation, the bar that all students need to meet to have the privilege of submitting an application to any of our CSU or UC schools. It's pretty much the golden standard across the country for the most part. It's kind of a minimum expectation in terms of submitting an application. And the good news is that almost all of our graduation requirements that we have in the district are pretty much in alignment with these requirements. So there's not a ton of extra work apart from one single thing, mainly, and that's grades. Okay, when we talk about grades in college admissions, to graduate from Nortel High School, you can receive a D- and earn credits towards graduation. To apply to college, if in that same course, if it's like say an English class that's required, that D- is typically viewed as deficient in the college application process. And so we would have to potentially remediate some of that stuff to get to a certain goal or benchmark that a student had for themselves. So this is actually kind of a example of what a typical senior, or kind of like process through high school. And on the bottom, the left side, it says effort and undertaking. So how much are students taking on? and the time or grade is across the bottom. And so as students are coming into 9th grade, many of their courses, while it can be challenging because there's a lot of new expectations, are relatively a similar playing field across the board, right? So the students are generally taking about the same level of coursework, similar level of expectations. 10th grade starts to get a little bit harder, where students might be taking like 1 or 2 AP classes or things like that, maybe adding an extra elective with independent study PE or something along those lines. So the effort in undertaking the rigor level steps up a little bit. Here's a little bit of a preview though, what typical junior year kind of looks like for many students. Not all, but many. Students tend to kind of like put the most energy and emphasis, for a lot of different reasons, some of them very valid, in the 11th grade year. And it tends to be considered one of the harder years of high school for most students. Students have access to a lot more AP classes if they chose. They continue to have 6 classes that they're going to be taking. Many of those will be more advanced though, so it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Senior year rolls around and many students actually pull the reins back a little bit. Maybe they aren't taking a full load of 6 classes, maybe they're taking 4 or 5. But it does give an opportunity for students to kind of reevaluate, maybe work on some of their after high school plans. But then this happens. This is called senioritis. Hits around spring of their senior year. And so while it's still a ways away for you, I like to mention it because you can kind of see the trajectory, and it's something to always be aware of, is that that's a really kind of tumultuous time for students. Many times, like if they are applying to college, maybe they got their notices, they've maybe decided, maybe even at that point, where they're going. And so it's kind of like, oh, I've already done all the things. I don't have to do anything else. The beach looks really good right now, and I'm gonna go do that instead. So it's just an important thing to know, like there is some pretty standardized trajectory of high school that students are gonna work through. So I do wanna highlight just briefly what some of the A through G requirements are. As students continue, like I said, as they go into junior year, many more of these classes tend to be available, right? So 9th and 10th grade, fairly prescriptive in terms of what classes they need to take. We add a history class in 10th grade, which is either world history or AP human geography. Okay, that's the 10th grade history courses that your students are hopefully taking. If you're not, then you need to talk to me. 11th grade goes into US history or AP US history, and then the seniors take a combined, it's our only single course that's split into 2 semesters. They're in the same class, they don't change classes or teachers or anything else, but it does change subjects, and they're technically different subjects, is government, and then the second half is economics, but it actually does not fulfill the history requirement for A through G. The next one is probably the biggest one that sometimes there's 2 areas that tend to get students kind of in hot water in relation to A through G. English tends to be one of them, mainly because they need all 4 years. Just like they do for graduation, they need so 8 semesters here of English. And they all need to be with a C- or higher. Right? And so what that means is if a student got a D in a semester of an English class, until they remediate that somehow, they're not eligible to apply to any CSU or UC. Okay, so it's a pretty important benchmark for students to understand, and it's much easier to kind of get back on track earlier on if we can work on it. Summer school is a great opportunity if that's a goal to work towards, but that's one big area. And then students tend to, they'll take their English 9, pre-AP English 2 is essentially English 10. And then we have our English 11 and 12. So ERW is our English 12 class, our college prep English class, and the English 11. AP English Language and Literature are the 2 grade level AP English classes. And then some students will even consider taking some classes through Sierra College, and that's what English 1A and 1B is. And so as we go through this 10th grade year, later in the school year, we'll start doing some game planning, getting some information about what might be the best fit related to your student and their strengths or weaknesses, keeping in mind things like balance and extracurriculars and work and all those other things that are important in keeping kids healthy and happy and involved in school. This is the other area that students tend to struggle with, math. So math is one of the biggest ones because it's hard for students. I mean, there's no other way to say it. Math is just a hard subject for many students. And so students to graduate from high school, must take 3 years of math, the same number of years that you need to complete to apply to college. A couple of the main differences are going to be which level of math do they need to get through. For graduation, students need to get through at minimum integrated math 2. So an example might be maybe they took intro to integrated math as a 9th grader, IM1, IM2. If they're like, I'm done with math, they will graduate with those classes. We do encourage students to take a senior year of math. They can continue into IM3. For college purposes, integrated math 3 is that bare minimum benchmark that they have to meet. Okay? So that same student who started an intro to integrated math would take IM3 as a senior, and if they do that with this year better, they would then meet their A through G requirements. Say a student is more advanced in math and they came in as a 9th grader and maybe took IM2. So if they took IM2 as a 9th grader, they would probably be in IM3 this year. After that, they would likely take our AP pre-calculus class, which would be their junior year math class. After that, when they take AP pre-calculus, and math is funky, we're not going to get too deep into it, that actually counts as 4 years towards college. Okay, it's a 4th year level advanced mathematics course. Technical term is called validation. There's pages of information on the UC system, but it's essentially that you're being essentially awarded years type of credit towards a math class because you're taking an advanced level math class. Students should still consider taking a senior year math class, in my opinion, especially depending on what their goals are, but if you're looking at engineering or things like that, calculus is kind of expected to a certain degree. We float statistics around from time to time. In my time here, we've only offered it maybe once or twice, but it's another online or maybe a Sierra College class if calculus maybe isn't necessarily the right next step for kids, and it's not necessarily for all kids. Laboratory science is another one that's a little bit tricky sometimes because they have 2 years requirement, just like our high school. So they have to take a physical and a life science. Same requirements for college. So their 9th grade biology class and their 10th grade chemistry class, if they get C's or better in those classes, this requirement and our graduation requirement is met. Okay? But these like green 3s and 4s are really kind of the recommended levels. These become kind of their electives. So when kids take like an environmental science, they're like, I don't have any electives. You do, it's science. That is what you elected to take, and it's a college prep elective. And so that's what they would call it, but it's not like your true elective that we would consider like maybe an art class or a TA or strength development or things like that. Okay? These are some of the different science classes they have, and many students will take several of these throughout high school. One interesting note is that if we do have a CTE pathway, 3 of them, culinary, engineering, and we have sports medicine as well. Sports Med 2 actually fulfills a area D science course in the A through G requirements. So if students are like wanting to complete a pathway interest in that area, that actually counts towards one of their laboratory science requirements too. E is language other than English. This is a difference from our graduation requirements. Graduation requirements, you need 1 year of a fine art or a world language. So 1 year of all those to graduate. College splits those in 2 different areas and has requirements in both. For language, you do need to complete 2 years of the same world language. So it needs to be level 1 and level 2, for example, you can't take French 1 and Spanish 1 and meet this requirement that way. Okay? We do have 4 levels of Spanish plus like a Spanish speaker or immersion level Spanish course at the high school that both usually culminate kind of in the AP Spanish language course here. Similarly to math, like I mentioned for AP Pre-Calc, languages kind of do the same thing. The 2 areas in college and CSU requirements that kind of do that, where if a student, say, went through immersion and took Spanish 3 for Spanish speakers, technically speaking, that is a 3rd year Spanish course. While you should probably continue in that area, if you just took that Spanish 3 for Spanish speakers course, technically you will meet A through G requirements in that area, as long as you get a C- or better in both semesters. F is the visual performing arts. That's going to be anything related to the fine art or performing art area, and that's going to be something that you have to, again, do the same single course for 1 year, and that's the difference from graduation. We do have a couple interesting new courses that are starting this year, so we do have Intro to Guitar started last year, and that's actually fairly popular. Kids like that. It's a beginner music class. And then music production is brand new this year, and that's more like I want to be a DJ, or like I'm going to produce music, like with a computer and drum pads and synthesizers, things like that. And you could be a musician or not a musician and take that course. So it's pretty cool. The kids have been liking it. We're having an assembly tomorrow with like a hip hop group. They're actually going to come do a workshop in that class tomorrow with that class and go over how they produce music. So it's pretty neat. And then lastly, G of the A through Gs. You need 1 year of a college prep elective, and I won't spend too much time because any of those other classes that are extra, or any of these classes, which every single student to graduate will get economics for half of that, because they have to take that to meet graduation requirements, just making sure you get a C or better. But any extras, if you took an extra math class, if you took an extra science course, all those will fulfill this requirement first. Okay, so just when generally students don't need to worry about 99% of the time. So why does all that matter? This is a picture of what? How do you know? I mean, it looks like bark, right? What can you tell me about said tree? Not that much, probably, right? Like, you know, maybe if you're a botanist or like an arborist or something like that, you could probably maybe tell me the species based on the bark. It's brown, maybe it's not an aspen, you'd probably say that, right? So like you can tell some information from a view like this. And this is typically what we think of as adults in relation to the college admissions process. We think of it looking at students just like this. They're a number, a transcript, and a test score, right? And that has historically been the fact, and it is still this is probably like the CSU application system itself, like our Cal Polys and San Diego States and Sac States. That system is probably the closest to this view of most of the systems in the US. But in reality, most systems are more like this now. They call it a comprehensive or holistic review. And what that means is they're taking contextual information about students, both about writing, about information about where they grew up. Like, we can tell this tree is alive. We can tell that it's not right next to a river necessarily. We can tell that it didn't get struck by lightning. You know, we couldn't tell if that tree in the last picture was on its side dead or not, right? Or what other challenges maybe it went through. Was there a forest fire that went through and like burned all the other trees around it? We don't know. Colleges, though, really do value getting to know students as best they can. And so students are more than just a transcript, their GPA, and a test score now. So they really do value things like recommendation letters, their writing that they submit to colleges, things like demonstrated interest. So taking courses that align with areas that you're interested in. All of those things are essentially cumulative in painting the picture of who the student is and how they fit onto said college campus. So I say that mainly because I think sophomore year is when some of the families and students start to panic a little bit about this whole college admissions thing. Like 9th grade, it's like deer in the headlights. 10th grade, it's like, oh man, now I gotta start thinking about this because it starts to matter. But it's sometimes nice to know that it's not just about being a perfect student. It's about also being involved in your community, being an athlete or not. It's about being, volunteering or being involved in clubs, relationships that they make with students, taking care of siblings or like kids. It's about all those different things that really tie into creating a well-rounded person that they're trying to find to fit into their university or college. At any level, that's 4-year college, 2-year colleges don't necessarily have competitive admissions, but they do look at things like that as well. So a couple things to keep in mind about sophomore overview. So this is the year to kind of keep maintaining grades or fixing grades if things were kind of like a little bumpy last year. So 10th grade is the first year that for CSUs and UCs that they do, I say their comprehensive GPAs and grades and classes they're taking are still very important. So I don't want to not say that, but they do consider a lot of other factors. So GPA for 10th graders is the first year that CSUs and UCs actually use when they're calculating GPA. So they don't actually use 9th grade when they're looking at that. So if a student had a rougher 9th grade year and they rock it in 10th grade, a lot of times their overall cumulative GPA looks funky, but their 10th grade actually looks pretty solid. And it kind of goes from there. Make sure that they're getting involved. And passion, I probably should change that word. I don't necessarily like the word passion because I don't know that I'm all that passionate about something sometimes. Like, passion is a very charged and like dangerous word to use with students because they may have very strong interest or like be really dedicated to things, but passion means like a lot. And so we use it so much that it's kind of like love, where we say love, and we change that word so much that it means very different things when people say it. So passion is very similar to that. But volunteering, playing a sport, getting involved with a team on campus or a club, we just had Clubapalooza, and like there's a lot of stuff that kids can do. And it's sometimes nice to even like use it as kind of an exploration tool. Do you want to be a vet? How do you know? Go volunteer at the Humane Society and see what you like about it. Like try to see it's not always possible, but it's sometimes nice to find it and use it as a tool, not just a volunteer experience, but a tool to kind of help you self-explore. Don't spread yourself too thin though. Okay, that kind of sometimes is contrary to, I think, what some of our culture here at Nortel High School has also become. Students do a lot. They do a lot of sports, they do a lot of academics, kind of like every year, especially, so 10th grade when we talk about 11th grade classes, you will probably hear me say this, are you sure you want to take on that much? Because that is the year when students really ramp it up, okay? But they want depth, and they means employers, they means colleges, they means financial aid opportunities and scholarships. They'd rather see you invested in something more deeply than kind of skating the surface on a lot of different things, okay? Again, not always possible, but it's nice to try to do what you can with what you have available, okay? But also you want to challenge yourselves in appropriate classes, okay? And I always tell students when I'm talking to them, like, I don't think, like, when I say maybe you're taking on too much, is this too rigorous for you? It's typically not this particular class is too rigorous for you, but potentially the combination of all of your classes and extracurriculars and other things that you have going on in your life is too difficult for you. And I think sometimes that's misheard by both students and parents, is that I'm not saying like, yes, you can absolutely do AP Psychology, but can you do AP Psychology, AP English, Pre-Calculus, AP Bio, and hold down 30 hours a week at your job? Probably not. Like, and probably not healthily even if you could. So it's more about finding that right balance of what the things are that we're trying to get done. So the other thing that starts to kind of come into the world of both pathways and our meetings that we're going to be talking with students about is this idea of researching colleges and careers. And sometimes we actually flip the equation, I think, where students will be like, I want to go to Cal Poly. What majors do they have at Cal Poly? That's not necessarily the correct order of operations. You should start by, what is it I'm interested in? What are the things that like I find myself thinking about when I'm bored, or things that I find myself doing when I don't have any other things going on? What are some jobs that I might be able to build or do in a related field to that, okay? And then, what colleges can help me get there, okay? Because that single college that sometimes is like the sports team, or like where everybody from North Tahoe goes, or it's at the beach, or whatever the drawing factor is, probably a very good college. I say Cal Poly, I started at Cal Poly, like it's a great college, it's a super awesome place to be. But going there and not having a major that meets your goals is kind of counterintuitive. So you want to make sure that you know a little bit of that pre-thinking. That's where we sometimes have to step in on behalf of students and start, hey, have you thought about this? Because many times they haven't, they just think about that next step. If you're traveling, this is a really great year to start, like, go on Google Maps, type in college, university, or junior college. If you're gonna go to LA, pick one or two while you're down there, and just stop by, see if they have a tour. Students sometimes think in their head, or they're like on the internet, because they don't put the ugly pictures on the internet website, they put the good pictures on the internet website, and sometimes they think this is all the college looks like and all it is, and it's for me, based on like a web search. I would say at least half the time, students who visit a school that's like, this is the #1 school for me, they leave that school saying like, I don't even know if I'm gonna apply anymore. Or vice versa. I challenge you guys as the adults to be like, hey, we're in Phoenix, let's go to one of these Arizona State universities or something like that, or U of A, and go walk around and see what it's like. Good chances, they walk around like, this actually is not what I thought it was gonna be. And I hear more stories about that, and to be honest, more stories of students actually attending those schools that were not even on their list initially. and being very happy there. Okay? Keeping a data tracking system is also very helpful in this year in time of life. It could be paper, it could be digital. We have a lot of resources on our website, like some different tools, some handbooks, some tracking sheets that sometimes become more important as they get to senior, but students will also, they'll put in the time, right? They'll be like, oh yeah, I spent 2 hours on SCORE last night and researched and found all these cool schools. And then I'll ask them like 2 weeks later, like, tell me about what else you did. And like, I don't even remember what I did. Like they put in the time, but they never really like write down the research or the information that they learned along the way. And this is a long process. It's where you have to be kind of in the long game for this whole thing. SCORE I mentioned is if you're had other students that have come through, we used to have Naviance. SCORE has kind of replaced that. Naviance got very expensive and kind of outdated. SCORE is cheaper and more up to date, but it does look a little different. It does some similar things. But it's a great college and career research tool. Students will be using that in pathways. Many of your students in 10th grade probably used it a little bit in 9th grade. It starts to start ramping up a little bit more each year that they go through high school. There are other tools like big features through the College Board. There's a Peterson's College Search. There's a number of resources, and I'm all for, it's not a one-stop shop. Use different sources for information. All right, so let's talk a little bit about testing, because it's changed probably since some people I see in here that have had kids go through school. But testing is in a very different landscape now than it was pre-COVID. Okay? COVID had changed, and I think mostly in good ways. Okay? I think the change is primarily positive. But about 95% of schools out there, colleges, like four-year universities typically, do not require any sort of college admissions test like the SAT or the ACT. Okay, where in the past, I would say about 80% of colleges did require that. Okay, so it's a very dramatic flip. And I think some of the reasons that's good is because it takes away that singular point in time that a student either walked into a room prepared to take a test for 3 hours on very sometimes debatable content, how that impacts their ability to get in or not. Students still can take. Many schools are optional, which basically means you can submit if you would like, but you're not required to. And it basically reallocates kind of some of the weighting that would play into those test scores and puts it on other areas of their application. Okay? So most schools don't do it. The PSAT is something that does start in 10th grade. Every year this event always happens after the deadline that we have by the College Board to actually submit orders for the PSAT. We did try to send out notices to both students and families. Hopefully, if your kid was interested in taking it, they did get registered. If not, they will have another opportunity as a junior to take it as well, which is typically the year that is probably the best use of their time in that exam for most students. But that time frame, because we're test is in October, we have a certain date we have to get registrations in, and it's always like the second week of school or something ridiculous. Kind of the test that I use is a student will come in, or a parent and a student will come in and say, yeah, I just really struggle on tests. I don't know what it is. I freak out, like I freeze. I don't feel like I score very well. Like I have test anxiety. Like I kind of like really panic a lot. Should I take the SAT? No. Most likely not. Like if you are knowing that you're probably going to struggle in that exam, why put yourself through the torture? Focus on other areas of your life that add value to an application or yourself, right? The application does not determine everything that's important. Okay, things that are valuable in, like maybe you want to spend some more time in community service on a Saturday instead of sitting in an exam. Okay, it does not hurt to take a test. So like, it's not like you're gonna like go there and like ruin your chances of getting into college. But just know, like, if you know pretty much for a fact that testing is not you, do something else. Build yourself up in different ways instead of kind of sitting through an exam that's probably not going to really do the thing that you're hoping it's going to do anyways. But if you feel like you're a strong test taker, it can add some value and maybe demonstrate strengths in different ways. Okay, so you can take an exam, you can take the PSAT, you can take SATs multiple times. and still decide after the fact if you want to submit those scores or not. You want to just know if it's an additive factor or not in your process. So PSAT will be on October 24th for 10th and 11th graders. Like I said, the deadline has passed for that particular exam. It will probably be a very similar time frame next year if a student didn't sign up, but it will be offered in some time, typically later in October, but the registration is usually within like the first 2 weeks of school. We're not going to dive too much into essay testing or SATs, given the reduced demand and impact for it generally that we've seen. But I just want to kind of give you a brief overview of what it looks like. So it's 2 sections of 3 different tests. It's on a 400 to 1600 point scale. So 1600 would be considered perfect, even though there's some, it's not necessarily got every single question right per se. If a student does qualify for free and reduced lunch, they can actually receive 2 exams for free, as well as some fee waivers to send any test scores if they chose. And there is no penalty for guessing, which there, believe it or not, there used to be. They used to penalize wrong answers by a negative -1/4 point. They don't do that anymore. Test prep, and this is probably more applicable for any test, not just the SAT. Okay, even if your student is not going to take any of these exams, but any higher stakes exams, smarter balance test, chemistry test, whatever it might be, it's important to know that the best way to prepare is actually to pay attention and be in school and do the things that the teachers or your instructors are asking you to do. Okay? Usually if like students are taking like a test prep class or things like that, they're not teaching kids content generally. They're teaching kids how to game a complicated and often unfair exam. Okay? You should always guess B, or like you need to whittle down your answers by 2 and then you have a better chance of getting the right answer, or like timing tips and things like that. Okay? Which are valuable if you want to go down that route, but it's also something that you're going to learn the content that you need to be successful content-wise in class typically, and it's very much based on a typical high school curriculum. The state test is also fairly important, and you're going to be hearing that from us this year and next year. The state testing or Smarter Balanced exams are an 11th grade primary exam. You will have a 10th grade science test that students will take later in the year. But the 11th grade ones are actually fairly important, not only for students, but also for us as a school. Okay, so the Smarter Balance exams are taken in math and English. And so many times they are not taken super seriously by kids, unfortunately. And so one of the areas that impacts is us as a school and how money, decisions, and time are being spent as educators. So when students come into a test, and I don't fault them necessarily for it, because for them, it's not that high stakes, right? You can maybe earn some awards. It might help you qualify for maybe not needing to take like a remedial class in college or like a summer bridge program in some certain circumstances, but generally speaking, it's more of an internal measure of a school, but it's how we as a school are held accountable to the state of California and other places. And so when students don't take it as seriously, it makes us take it very seriously, and it changes where we have to spend our time and energies, unfortunately. So we are going to be doing some increased efforts and energies around that to encourage students to be successful. So while that's not necessarily the thing that they're going to be doing this year, we do want to encourage students to, as they're going through school, to be ready for those exams and we're going to try to kind of make it fun, maybe bring some snacks and like add some more pizzazz to the process of like celebrating people who take it and take it successfully. But students can actually receive also some awards at graduation and stuff too, related to some of their achievement on those exams. Similarly on exams, this will be your first likely year that students might be taking an AP course. At the end of an AP course, there's an optional exam that students have the opportunity to take if they want. It is not a required exam, but for students who feel even moderately prepared, we encourage students to take it. It's not something that they have to feel like they're going to walk in and ace it. Sometimes the experience is more important. But it is a formal curriculum, the AP program by College Board. It's trademarked, that has a lot of rules, like my coordinator exam booklet's like that big. But they'll usually take maybe 1 or 2 AP classes, and then they have this end of course or capstone exam that they'll take Generally, it's the first 2 full weeks of May every year. This year, the first, May 1st is like a Tuesday or something, so it's not happening those weeks. It has to be the first full week. And they last, there's exams on specific dates and times, and it takes about 2 weeks for all the exams to happen. Students will also take more classes in 11th and 12th grade, but this is another area that students, and I think sometimes as a school, we sometimes downplay the importance of exams. And I think that's one area that we're going to try to do some continued work in about how do we find the right balance between letting a student demonstrate mastery in different ways, but also preparing them for the high stakes world of some of these exams that will happen in life or in college or in work, right? Whether it's an engineering exam or a high stakes final for a college class, okay? Many students, I think there's a somewhat common perception that I sat through the class, I should just be able to roll in on a Monday in May, sit for my exam, and pass it. And generally speaking, that's not the case. And so we want to make sure that students are preparing throughout the year. These courses are essentially a semester-long college course that we teach in high school. So if you think back to college finals, that's essentially what they're doing. So if you think of the movies, not like Animal House, but a different movie that has good college examples, they're oftentimes spending hours and hours in the library preparing for their finals and all-nighters and all these other things. I'm not saying that needs to happen, but they should be spending and dedicating some time. There is early registration required though for this. So registration will happen and teachers will primarily be the point people in charge of helping students in AP classes get registered. But the deadline is November 13th at noon, and people might say, wow, that's early for a May test. It is, but it also makes sure that students are knowing that they're committed to taking this exam. Okay, so we'll be sending out some more information later in October related to making sure students are signed up. Payment will not be due at time of sign up. We'll probably do payments starting in January through the Aries Titan program online. And with the information we'll send out. If you're on free reduced lunch, it's $20 a test. If you don't have that qualification, it's $50 a test. So the district actually reduces the cost. It's about $96 normally. Almost lastly, there's a few more pieces of information, then we'll be wrapping it up. But I do want to just highlight this because it's similar to preparing for tests, but related to coursework and achievement in class. When I was at Cal Poly for a little bit, they had a big thing that was 30 to 40, and you saw signs of 30 to 40 everywhere. And what they said was students in class need to spend 30 to 40 hours a week studying outside of their class or lab time. And so I kind of adapted it more towards the high school end of the perspective, and I call it the 1 to 2. And students generally need to spend 1 to 2 hours at minimum a night of the week, typically. Weekends, I don't really count the weekends, but nightly work. And one of the differences is that it's not just homework. Okay, so it's not just if your kid comes home and be like, what are you gonna do for your 1 to 2 hours? I don't have any homework, nothing. You're like, sweet, all right, let's get up, score. Let's start working ahead. Let's read. Let's do some college research, career research. It's not just the assigned homework that's going to be turned in for a grade. It is also a time and opportunity to start working on that investment. And if your student's going to navigate high school successfully, this is super important. Because not only does it help them do this with less stress, but it also helps them when they leave our school. They have a skill set of spending time regularly and understanding how to truly, this is studying. Studying is not just homework. Studying is doing things that are not assigned to prepare you for what's coming next. Just your quick reminder, since some community service, it hasn't really changed for your class, but if you have older kids, we did move away from community service during kind of the COVID time, and so that's been phased back in. Your students, I believe, have the full 30 this year. I think 9th and 10th graders have the full 30, and then the juniors and seniors still do have a prorated amount. But students do need to complete 30 hours of community service by the time that they graduate. Okay, that is, if you do not have 30 hours of documented community service by graduation day, it's the same thing as failing English. You will not graduate, you will not receive a diploma. Okay, and so it's kind of a big deal if students don't kind of keep up as they go through high school, because they can start accumulating. And believe it or not, 30 hours is not that much. A lot of schools, they have 30 hours annually that they're completing. It is part of your pathways grade as well, so you have this 30-hour cumulative total amount that you need to meet. If a student did 30 hours last year as a freshman, they will graduate high school with those 30 hours. However, if they do not continue to do the annual amounts, they will not pass their pathways class. Okay, so there are 2 requirements. So in order to pass pathways, you also have to do the annual hourly requirement as well, mainly because we don't want it to be a one and done thing. Like, being involved in our community is not just that I check the box and I can graduate. It's we need to give back to our people who work and live here. Be active members of it. There's a form that gets pre-approved. Many of our students are pretty well aware of it now. And then all the paperwork and stuff also gets returned to their pathways teacher, and they will track it throughout this year. I think for sake of time, I'm just going to briefly touch on one thing related to transcripts. Just know that we do review transcripts usually more than once a year for all of our kids to make sure that things are kind of like staying on track and we haven't missed anything, and they don't need to remediate something that they didn't notice or something like that. But I think the biggest thing that sometimes sophomores start thinking about is the GPA. Okay, they start having more classes starting to play into their GPA calculation, and so we do report 6 different GPAs. There's a non-weighted category, and that's kind of every grade has the same weighting to it. It's not, an AP class is not any better than a PE class, for example. And so an A gets a 4, a B equals 3, a C equals 2, a D equals 1, and an F equals 0. You add it all up, it's a math equation, divided by the number of courses a student takes, and that equals your GPA or grade point average. Weighting means AP courses and UC transferable college courses, they get a little bonus points for A's, B's, and C's to recognize the rigor and added difficulty of that course. So in that similar thing, for an AP course, an A would equal 5 points instead of 4, a B equals 4 points instead of 3, and a C equals 3 points instead of 2. D's and F's actually do not get any weighting associated with it. Okay, so a D is a D and an F is an F. And that's why you can sometimes see students get above a 4.0. The highest a non-weighted GPA will ever go is a 4.0. Never mathematically can it go above that. And as soon as a student gets 1B, it will never, unfortunately, again be a 4.0. Mathematically impossible. Okay? Whereas in a weighted one, sometimes if they get a B in a class and they take an AP course the next year, it can get back up to that 4.0 or above. Okay? And then the 3 rows are basically your academic GPAs. So the first 2, that's going to be essentially any A through G approved course. So it doesn't include things like PE, staff assistants, or things like that. And then the last one is total cumulative. All graded classes get added up there. Just to know, when students are applying to, say, colleges, when we report GPAs, we are very typically reporting the academic 9 through 12 weighted and unweighted GPA. So that's the primary one that most people probably will be paying close attention to. Finally, I talked about SCORE. We are working on a way for importing parent information too, because there is a parent access piece to this tool. And sometimes you want to do some exploration yourself. There's some interesting like financial aid information, which usually parents are the ones mostly concerned about. But also just some research, maybe you can suggest to other kids and stuff like your kids too about, hey, I saw this other school that popped up that maybe was interesting. We're working on that. It's a little complicated with the connection with Aries, but students do have access to it from anywhere. They'll log in using their TTSD Google account through Clever, and they can rock and roll in there and spend a bunch of time. There's interest inventories to learn about themselves, college exploration and career exploration tools. Pretty good information on there, okay? So we covered a lot of information, almost at 1 hour exactly what I was hoping for. Are there any questions from my giant audience that I can answer now?
Talking about community service.
Uh-huh.
Last year, I think you said that it counts from August through the end of the school year. What if they got community service in July?
Yeah, so it's year to year. So when they leave school, at the end of their, say, freshman year, if they did community service in July, that will count towards this year.
So the wording is wrong on the pathways.
On the what?
The wording may be wrong on the pathways.
Potentially, yeah. So the pathways, they each create their own thing. Generally speaking, yes. If they pre-approved it over the summertime before, because we're not going to go back and change their grade from the last year if they did stuff after that year completed. The biggest thing about pathways is ninth grade is that is absolutely true. So when they come into ninth grade, we can't accept anything before the first day of school. So, but after that, if they do something over the summertime, they just want to make sure that they get it pre-approved before they leave for the summertime. So they do have to do a little bit of thinking ahead, like, hey, I'm going to plan on doing this over the summertime, maybe consistently. Their pathways teacher of record that year can actually sign off on it, and then they would turn it into their next year's pathways teacher to count towards their next year's grade. But I'll double check the forms and make sure that it's accurate. Any other questions? If you don't want to be on YouTube and you want to ask me questions afterwards, you can too. Yeah.
I have a few though, if that's okay.
Many times if you ask questions, people online or not here also have very similar questions, so it helps.
So you were saying with sophomore grade, it's hard to get them to see down the road and see like if this happens, then these two things will happen down the line or not happen.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to get through to them
If there was, you would not be here. You'd probably be on your own island in the Pacific somewhere, like with the yacht part next to it.
I just figured I had to ask that.
Not in like the magic fix it button way of like magic. Oh my gosh, this kid now is like has the brain of a 24-year-old. No, but one thing that does help is it's kind of related to things like consequences too. Is letting them be involved in the process of deciding what if they've made a mistake, have them think about it, like have them reflect, not just have a consequence happen. Like what might you do different next time if you can remember to? What are and then also have them involved in setting their own consequence. Because sometimes it's, as an adult, when we set consequences, it's also seen as like, I'm the man putting the thumb on my kid, like you're doing the consequence to me. Right? Versus, I made the bad decision. I'm involved in the decision-making process about what an appropriate consequence is for me, and I'm more invested in that learning process, if that makes sense. But no, unfortunately, it's just part of that developmental process of growing up. If they're going to make mistakes, and that's part of learning, right? And I think in our culture, we've also negated this idea of failing. Like failing is the absolute thing that we need to avoid. I think on some large scale levels, yes, that's true. But I think we've narrowed it down so small that even a small failure, you missed an assignment or you got a C when I expected an A, like those types of things are learning experiences, and we've kind of made them fearful experiences for kids where, dear God, if I get a B, right? I never get a chance to explore what it's like to fail because I'm so fearful of doing so because of whatever expectation is related to, say, a grade or an activity I'm involved in or things like that. So like getting comfortable with at least small scale failures actually helps students develop processes to avoid those in the future versus just like, how do we clear that obstacle away from them so they never have to experience failure? It feels kind of good in some ways, but it actually kind of sets them up for failure down the road. I can tell you that from experience.
Another question I had was, do you set up individual meetings with every student?
We can. So we call those ILPs, or individual learning plans, and we're working on adjusting kind of what our plans are related to that. We have just sent out some information for seniors, so I have the seniors also this year. So we're starting with our post-secondary planning process, which does have some individual components. 9th grade many times will probably have more of an emphasis on some of those kind of introductory level meetings that are more one-on-one. 10th and 11th grade, it will probably be less of an emphasis on like sitting down one-on-one, but it will be available. Just maybe not right away when school starts. Usually when we're working with the senior class, they kind of fortunately and unfortunately are kind of the first priority bucket because they have a lot of really important fall related time sensitive things that have to get done for them and with them. But yes, throughout this year we absolutely will. We also do classroom lessons, both through pathways. We will be pushing into things like English classes and history classes and doing lessons related to all of our domains, whether that's academic, social emotional, or college and career related stuff. So they'll get a lot of information on a lot of different avenues, but anytime that you want an individual sit down, feel free. We do appointments and things like that. But later on, we'll likely do some sort of optional, like, hey, if you'd like to have kind of a planning meeting related to you, where you and your kid come in and kind of go over the information, we'll have an opportunity to do that. Probably closer to like late November, December is my guess. As we get ready to move into kind of that course planning process that tends to happen in around February. There's usually a lot of questions about what should I do next year? What's the right classes for me? Things like that. Okay. Anything else? No? All right. Any questions? Yes.
I know there's very few parents, but I just want to share for the school too. So important that the kids do well on those state tests. My daughter just graduated, started college this year. She and a bunch of friends decided I don't believe in state testing, so they didn't answer anything. She did very badly, and she wanted to get the biliteracy seal, and they graduated with this SAT. So she did all 4 years of Spanish, but she failed the English test, and she couldn't get it because she didn't do well on the state test. So it's important, and she told me, Mom, nobody told me, I didn't know. So that's good to know.
Yeah, so there are things if you're not like, and again, that's that pre-thinking that we're going to try to message different things. But again, we also know they're teenagers, and I mean, we can only control what we control. But it's something just to know, and we're going to try to make it more of a thing that students and parents also pay attention to, because there are some students that they get a very beautiful, nice serape and like recognize at awards night and different things like that. It's a good thing for resumes and whatnot. But if they don't get a 3 or higher on their English exam, there's no way for them to qualify for that typically. So thank you, Angelica, I appreciate that. Any other questions? Otherwise, I've kept you over time. I'm happy to hang out if you have any individual questions, or we can follow up later at a different time, but anything else for the group? All right, cool.
Thanks, Jeff.
Go forth and have fun.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, all right, you guys take it easy, and thanks for coming.